Hello, in this video I'm going to say a few things about the wedge. This is the simple machine that tends to get left to the end because people have the least to say about it, and it's no different in my case. This is usually because there aren't questions around it that are easy to analyse. It's very hard to get a grip on the forces involved. So we can say something about the dimensions of the wedge, but in terms of what our input force and output force is, that's pretty hard to quantify with a wedge in comparison to the other simple machines. So we can't do the same sort of calculations very easily. We can't work out things like efficiency and stuff like that. But we can talk about what wedges are actually doing anyway, so at least we know how they work, even if we're not doing a numerical analysis of them. So classic wedge is going to be our axe head. So we've got a triangular axe head that's being driven. We've got some driving force that's driving it into, I don't know, a tree, something like that. This is being driven in here, our horizontal force. As it goes into the tree, we're going to get this sort of splitting effect where you're going to get these normal reaction forces which are going to be splitting the tree apart. So we've got the two things that you expect to see in a simple machine. We've got change of direction of the force and we've got change in magnitude of the force. Now, we might not be able to quantify the changes here, but we can look at the dimensions of the wedge to at least see how things would have changed. If we've got this length here, we've got some length L, so we've got a driving force which is going through a length L, but our splitting force is going through a much smaller distance on either side. So the relative dimensions of the wedge are going to then give us a magnifying effect. In this case, because we're going through a smaller distance, we must have a larger force here. Our output force must be greater there than our input force. Okay, we've got two of them, but if we've got a very narrow axe head, then great, we're creating a large force over a small distance. So this is how the wedge is working. You'll see there's a lot of similarity between wedges and an inclined plane. I mean, what really is the difference between if you've got a shallow inclined plane? This is, even if you've got a right angle there, it doesn't matter. This doesn't have to be an isosceles triangle over here for an axe. This is still a wedge. So you can use this to drive underneath an object. You've got something sitting over here, you drive underneath it using the wedge. You're going to raise the object up a small distance for a large distance driven underneath it. So you can use wedges just to lift something up in the air. We've got a number of ways of lifting things up in the air. You've got we can push the object up a slope. That's using our inclined plane. We can stick a lever underneath it and sort of crowbar it up in the air. That's another way of doing it. We can pulley things up in the air. Or we can slide a wedge underneath, which has got a lot of similarities, the same sort of analysis that we'd see on the inclined plane. So that's just another way of looking at inclined planes, really. But it might be quite hard to describe something like that as being that much of a wedge, because you ain't going to get that underneath things. So, but I suppose, theoretically, even though it's got a big angle here, that's still a wedge. I mean, this setup here is very similar to a doorstop. So we're trying to stop things moving. We put our doorstop on the floor. The door comes in and hits it. We've now got a change here in force. We've got a frictional force. This is trying to push the doorstop that way. So we've got a frictional force which is keeping the doorstop in place because of this large surface area relatively on the floor. That force is then getting sort of transferred by the wedge, the doorstop, into pushing the door upwards and against keeping it in place. And of course, the more you push the door up, the more it pushes the door stop down, the wedge down, and which means the more friction that you're going to get as well, because this is mu r, and we're going to get a greater reaction force the more we're pushing it down onto the floor. So same thing again going on with a wedge. But you'll see with all of these examples, in terms of knowing what forces we've actually got in play here, it's notoriously difficult to get friction anyway. We've got, who knows what's going on with this collection of forces around the doorstop? Who knows necessarily what force we're driving the axe into the ground, into the tree? I suppose there are some situations, where you get these axe things that might be falling. You might just let it fall under its own weight, or have a weighted axe head that's going down, and then we can say something about the driving force, what our input force would be, and then the splitting force that we're going to get. But then even for analysis there, we need to be saying quite a lot about the material to know what effect the output force is going to have on the material, and then what resistance the material is going to provide to the motion of the axe head going in. So there's a lot of stuff we just don't know about. But yeah, there's a lot of things there. I suppose another one, this is maybe think of these with this coming down here, like when you look at archways, when you're building an arch between two pillars and you're putting all your stones in, by the time we've got round to the top and you're dropping this sort of keystone in here, you've got the same thing. You've got an input force there, the weight of that stone, the wedge shape of it is then transferring that off. It's creating these forces split off into different directions. So it's the same thing there. So you can design that from an engineering point of view. Well, how do we want to spread this weight around the arch, and then what can the columns actually support? So it's all coming back to materials again on this, distributing these forces and looking at stress and strain of materials and things like this. So it's getting into Young's modulus and all of this sort of stuff later on. So I wanted to include the wedge. I didn't want to just leave it out because we haven't got some calculations that we're going to do. But you'll tend to find it left to the end for that reason. If anyone has any calculations, problems that can be analysed using the wedge beyond the basic, here's what the mechanical advantage of the wedge would be by looking at the dimensions, the length versus the height here of the wedge. Beyond doing that analysis, if you've got something else that you're aware of doing some numerical analysis of a wedge, then by all means put it in the comments or email me or something like that, because I'd love to see it. It would be a useful addition. But I wanted to put it in for completeness just so we can see what all 6 of these simple machines are actually doing.